This is a CBC podcast. The new CBC Radio Android app is here. With a click of a button, you can listen to your favorite CBC radio programs, enjoy live streams, and access more than 60 of CBC's most popular programs on demand. Choose your region, set favorites, and share what you're listening to via Facebook or Twitter. The CBC Radio app, now everywhere. Go to Google Play and install today.
Hello, I'm Anna Maria Tremonti, and this is The Current.
Project Money.
Hi, I'm Bryce Shivers.
And I'm Lisa Eversman.
We've come upon some tough times.
Money's running low.
It's kind of a long story, not my fault. But we figured out a solution. Rent it out.
You can rent out anything.
Extra bedroom? Rent it out.
Have a car? Rent it out. Just like New York City. You can rent out everything, anything, anyone.
Isn't that kind of like prostitution?
Not when it's from a cute website. Welcome to the cool, crisp, clean website of Rent It Out.
Very, very simple.
This new economy is so fun. We've rented everything out.
Got room in your fridge?
Rent it out.
Well, the TV comedy Portlandia never misses a chance to poke fun at the latest fad, and this time it is the share economy. It is about businesses that use the internet to offer shared access to goods and services. Things such as Airbnb, Zipcar, and TaskRabbit are all part of the share economy. Next time you need a hole but don't have a drill, Vancouver's Tool Library can set you up. The share economy is booming, but some believe it is actually a sign of a much bigger problem with the regular economy. Stephen Strauss is an adjunct lecturer in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hello.
Hello.
How big would you say the share economy is today?
The peer-to-peer part of that has been estimated at being about $25 billion by The Economist.
And are you surprised at that size?
No. I mean, in one sense, the peer economy has been with us forever. I think if you look back on your own life or your audience's lives, there's probably been some point where they've borrowed a room for somebody, borrowed a tool from somebody, got a lift from a friend in exchange for saying, well, look, I'll give you $20, or saying, I'll give you a lift next time. What has happened over the last several years is the internet has made the transaction cost of making these arrangements much lower, so it's much easier to do, which is, I think, a positive trend. A more negative trend, which I think is driving the sharing economy, is the stagnation of the middle class in the U.S., the high unemployment rate, which has left more and more people who might have owned a car in the past or might have been able to afford to own something directly more willing to share.
Are there numbers on how many people earn their living or seriously supplement their income this way?
The best statistics I know are from a study that Airbnb did of their market in San Francisco. They found that their average San Francisco participant was renting for about 60-ish nights per year, something on the order of $7,000 to $9,000 per year. 42% of the hosts used the money for regular living expenses. Over half of them said it was a significant contribution to paying their mortgage or rent.
So you see this driving, the shared economy being driven by need as opposed to what? As opposed to like a new way to just reach out and meet someone?
I wouldn't say exclusively being driven by need. But I would say that the drivers, in my mind, are the technology, which has simply made this much easier, made sharing a more viable alternative to ownership. And that's a positive. The negative driver that I see is a lot of people who, for one reason or another, are falling out of the middle class, not making it into the middle class, for whom participating in this is a major source of their income.
And can you give us some examples of how that might be working for those who need the financial gap filled?
Well, I mean, take a look at Lyft, take a look at any of the car services. You've got people who are willing to be out at 2 or 3 in the morning, driving strangers around town. How do I phrase this? All jobs and all work, I believe, are valuable and good things. But you do have to ask yourself how willing people would be to do that if they could find a better alternative.
So do you see anything wrong with creating these kinds of economic opportunities for people?
No, I'm not of the camp that we should try to prevent the sharing economy. I'm just aware that not all the things driving it forward are good things. Other downsides to the sharing economy, there was an interesting study done by some Harvard colleagues of mine that looked at Airbnb in New York and discovered that participants in the market who were Black were receiving about 10% less for comparable properties. Now, and one of their concerns that they raised is the technology enables you to see the person you're renting from. Airbnb very prominently posts pictures on its website, and that may be facilitating discrimination.
And what other areas do you see as problematic then with the share economy?
Potential end runs around taxes, important safety regulations, societal norms. And I'll just give a small personal anecdote. When I was living in New York a couple of years ago, the apartment next to me had somehow or another become part of a short-term sharing service. So where I thought I was living in a residential apartment building, my next-door neighbors were basically tourists who were coming in and out of the city. Some of whom were lovely people. Some of whom, frankly, played music loud and didn't really, understand the rules, the unspoken rules of how the apartment building functioned. Normally, that's not permitted. You rent in a building with an assumption that you're going to know who your neighbors are. They're going to be there for some period of time.
Well, it's interesting because we have talked to B&B owners actually who argue that some of these sharing things like Airbnb actually don't have to follow the same zoning regulations, safety regulations, insurance regulations than they do.
Exactly. No, that is very much my point. That to the extent that those regulations, let me split this into two pieces. To the extent those regulations exist for legitimate and good reasons, the fact that people are getting away with not paying taxes, doing short-term rentals in a building that's not designed for short-term rentals, et cetera, are bad things. The flip side to that, and again, there's always two sides, is some of those barriers are, frankly, regulatory barriers that are created so people can extract market rent. And I'll just give you an example in New York City. There are 15,000 cabs in New York City. Medallion cabs licensed in New York. That number is absolutely fixed. A medallion at the recent sale, the right to drive a cab in New York City, a yellow cab in New York City, went for $1 million. There is no logic to this. It reflects internal politics in New York City. To the extent that a Lyft, an Uber, somebody is able to get around those regulations, while still maintaining appropriate safety and insurance regulations, I think is a positive for the economy.
Do you see the share economy as a solution to or a manifestation of wider economic problems?
I would say I'd say in part a manifestation of wider economic problems.
And so are we letting governments off the hook in terms of job creation and opportunities in finding solutions to unemployment or low wages with this share economy?
I don't think the share economy is big enough to really take away the bigger societal problems. If you look at the U.S. economy, $25 billion does not solve 11 million people being unemployed. It's an interesting patch. It is at the margin helpful. But at least for the U.S., we continue to have core problems that, just to take an example, about 30% of American college-age students never attend college, which effectively means they're being confined to a lifetime of jobs at the margin of the knowledge economy. Whether we can solve that problem by getting them into college, solve that problem by giving them skills later on in life, those problems remain.
Stephen Strauss, thank you for your thoughts today.
Okay. Thank you for having me on the show.
Stephen Strauss, adjunct lecturer in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and we reached him in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You are listening to The Current on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM, and online on cbc.ca/The Current. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. My next three guests closely follow the rise of the share economy. April Rinne is the Chief Strategy Officer at Collaborative Lab, which works with companies, governments, and entrepreneurs interested in understanding the share economy. She's in San Francisco. Tom Slee is the author of No One Makes You Shop at Walmart, The Surprising Deceptions of Individual Choice. Tom Slee is in Waterloo, Ontario. And Chris Diplock is the co-founder of the Tool Library. He completed a study about the share economy in Vancouver, and that's where we have reached him. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning.
Tom Slee, give us a Canadian perspective. What do you make of Stephen Strauss's concerns that the share economy is a sign of a larger economic crisis?
Well, I'm a pessimist when it comes to the share economy, so I share some of his concerns, but I think he doesn't, to be honest, quite go far enough. I mean, I think what's happening here is as some of the share economy companies are going mainstream, they're not really creating communities or enabling sharing. What they're doing is extending almost the harshest of free market economics to parts of our life from which it was previously excluded. So we're getting more precarious forms of employment. We're getting Silicon Valley billionaires who are quite happy to stamp over city-level democracy and using the language of sharing to do it. And I think what we're seeing is almost an American attitude to government coming north of the border in this, that, that really we should just let the free market sort it all out. And there may be problems in the New York taxi industry, but I don't particularly see what that has to do with us in Canada.
Well, when you say Silicon Valley billionaires, give me an example of what you're talking about.
Well, so the sharing economy has many, many companies that are part of it, but it's really led by a handful. So we have Airbnb that you already mentioned, and they've raised over $300 million in venture capital so far. We have the sort of taxi alternatives, that's Lyft and Uber. Well, Uber's also raised well over $300 million, and Lyft has raised 80 million and is going for more. So you've got some big investments coming into these companies, and they're the ones who are really shaping this landscape. And they're doing it not because of a commitment to sharing. They're doing it because they want a good return on their investment.
April Rinne, what do you think of that? Do you see the rise in the share economy as symptomatic of a downturn in the regular economy?
I see the sharing economy as one piece of a much larger economic pie. But I want to zoom out for a moment here because we do work globally, and there are far more examples of smaller initiatives, some of which require money. They're monetized platforms, so to speak, but many more also that are non-monetized, where, as Stephen mentioned, sharing is the oldest behavior known to mankind. A lot of what's happening today is technology enabled, and we are now able to generate income, either make income, but also save money by sharing rather than owning assets. And if we look at this from a global perspective, yes, we have Airbnb and Uber and Lyft and so forth. Those are the companies that really get a lot of international press, but there are also hundreds, thousands actually, of companies around the world on every continent except for Antarctica, where these kinds of transactions are happening, and it's not about venture capital funding. That plays a role in some of these markets, but there's also an extraordinary emphasis on community, including how the government sees these things.
Well, give me an example. Mm-hmm. Give me an example.
Sure. So where would we like to start? South Korea actually has one of the most thriving share economies at this point. The mayor of Seoul has declared the city to be a shareable city. He has actually passed legislation quite favorable to promoting this kind of business behavior. He's committed investment funds. They're incubating local companies and neighborhood-led initiatives, everything from tool lending libraries in your neighborhood, so to speak, to in effect, a local equivalent of Airbnb that is run by Korean entrepreneurs, and the website is in the Korean language. It's called Kazazu. And really looking at this as an ecosystem through which, yes, they will attract some international companies, but they also want this to be much more homegrown, if you will, and promote local economic investment.
Chris Diplock, you started your own share economy business. Why?
I think it came out of a need from my own experience needing tools, and we took that need and kind of related to that need being there in a lot of communities and said, well, let's co-own all these tools together. And we saw some successful initiatives that had happened elsewhere in North America, and So we started that, and we knew the impact it could have.
So what is the tool library? Do you lend or do you rent?
So the tool library is a nonprofit lending library, and so they focus mostly on power tools. It's been around for about 2.5 years, and they focus on borrowing. So you pay an annual membership, and you pay a small nominal fee for a power tool, but hand tools you can actually check out for no cost. So that's the model they use, but there's kind of the models vary across, wherever you are in your neighborhood. But there is a healthy mix. When I look at what's around, and our report talked about how people are borrowing, and they do borrow from their peers and their neighbors, and then they also, maybe they're using a co-op or a community organization. And then, there's also a mix of them turning towards companies to use them to help meet their needs.
So who's using the service? Is it people doing, projects at home? What is it?
I think it varies. There's been people that have redone their entire basement, and there's just people that are just fixing that kind of creaky door. It kind of varies. But you get more of the sense is you get more people that are just doing handiwork around the home.
Okay. April Rinne, you have been talking about how it's all over the place. Do you use the share economy?
I do. I am an active proponent of it, and I also use it. That's how I got into it actually many years ago. And it's nice to be based here in San Francisco, and I do use some of the platforms here, but I also use them globally, and we do work internationally and have worked on every continent.
So what are you doing though? How do you participate in the share economy? What do you actually do?
Sure. So let's see. I have used Airbnb. Now that's not just here in San Francisco or in London. I've actually traveled on Airbnb in places like Rwanda. And I just actually booked a trip to Mongolia. I now actually can have local experiences in these markets where otherwise I would have stayed in a hotel in the past. I also use car sharing and ride sharing. I participate in P2P lending, so providing financial alternatives to traditional bank lending. I also participate in, for example, a platform called Skillshare, which enables me to tap into classes and learn things on a schedule that works for me. I've used TaskRabbit. I've used local ride-sharing platforms whenever I travel internationally. The list goes on and on. It's everything from learning to entertainment to travel and tourism to retail and clothing and getting clothing and, as Chris mentioned, tools and appliances and things like that as well.
What's TaskRabbit?
TaskRabbit is what we would call perhaps an eBay for errands. So instead of needing to take care of different tasks, and I really don't like the term tasks because it makes it sound menial, and some of the tasks are running errands and picking up groceries and that kind of thing, but it also involves things like handyman repair or computer repair or I've mentioned this before, a really neat task, helping somebody write a love letter. These are the kinds of things that end up on TaskRabbit. And so instead of having to take care of this yourself, you may not have the time or the ability or the interest. You can hire someone to help you do it.
Tom Slee, do you have any concerns about the labor side of that share economy?
Absolutely, yes. And I think one of the issues here is I have no problem with the kind of initiative that Chris was describing or some of the ones that April's describing. I think the mistake is to see this as part of the same initiative as the larger players like Airbnb and Lyft and Uber. I think what we see there is certainly on the TaskRabbit side. Let's take that for one example. I don't think this is a challenge to existing big businesses to provide an alternative at the community level. What they're becoming is essentially a temp agency. TaskRabbit already has a TaskRabbit for Business wing, where they're providing employees at short-term rates. So what you get here is really a new form of very precarious employment. And I think that's a dangerous path to go down.
And when you talk about precarious employment, just spell it out for us. What are you saying?
Well, so let's take some of the taxi alternatives, so Lyft and Uber. So what you're talking about here is instead of having taxi drivers, you just have people who increasingly need to use their own cars to provide this service. So you're talking about people whose insurance situation is unclear. You're talking about people who, if anything goes wrong, the risk is all on them and not on the company who is arranging the transport. Lyft and Uber are sort of protected from the consequences of if anything goes wrong. So all the risk and is pushed into the individual who's taking part in these organizations. And I think in addition to that, of course, they can set their own rules. The companies at the heart of this, if they want you off their platform, they just push you off their platform, and you have no appeal to that. So I think it's a very precarious form of work.
April, Rinne, what do you say to those fears?
So I find this conversation is fascinating, and I want to zoom out looking at this again from the jobs perspective. I acknowledge we have a huge challenge around this transition from, if you will, the old to the new economy. And I think that there is a big problem with how do we keep people gainfully employed. And I don't see the sharing economy, I never would profess that it's a solution to the quote unquote jobs crisis. What we're doing, though, is providing means of livelihood that never existed before. And we're giving people opportunities to have flexible work arrangements. So things that never existed before. And for example, if you look at TaskRabbit and you look at who are the TaskRabbits, the majority of TaskRabbits are people who have skills, have wanted to participate in the economy in the past, but have needed to have flexible work arrangements. So they've needed to not have a traditional 9-to-5 Monday through Friday job. So we're looking at people like retirees or mothers with young children, or interestingly, for example, Lyft drivers, they set their own hours. They can work whenever they want. Now, yes, they may wish to work when demand is higher, but they may also be pursuing other activities like a career in acting or music, or they want to be a chef or whatever the case may be. And income from Lyft allows them to pursue these other passions. So it's a really interesting mix of things. I do think we have a big, quote unquote, jobs crisis that no policymaker is truly prepared for. I do think the sharing economy helps to buffer and mitigate some of those effects. But more broadly, I think we are entering a world in which traditional corporate employment by a company is by and large going by the wayside. And so it's not a matter of how do we get more companies to employ people. It's how do we deal with the fact that by 2020, 40% of the workforce in the United States will be, in effect, considered freelance.
But let me ask you, April, because you're saying traditional employment by a company. If we look at some of these companies, Google Ventures has invested in the taxi services Uber. It's invested in the house cleaning services HomeJoy. Those are big corporations who are involved in this. If you look at Zipcar, it was bought out by Avis Budget Group. Lyft was sold to Enterprise. So these are big corporations who are involved in this. We're not getting away from them. They're just morphing.
I don't see it quite the same way. And I think what you're saying is Zimride, the assets from Zimride, which were relatively small, those were sold to Enterprise. Lyft itself is the company that Tom was referring to. So we're looking at, again, and keep in mind, we're looking at that part of the economy that is funded by outside capital, by commercial capital. And I want to underscore Chris's point as well. There are lots of different business models in this space. We've got nonprofits, we've got cooperatives, we've got for-profits. All of the ones you just mentioned are the for-profits, which over time will be one piece of this pie, but not the entire pie.
Okay, well, let's hear from Chris then. Chris, you have studied the share economy in Vancouver. What did you find out?
Well, we found one of the big findings was that about a third of Vancouverites wanted to share more with their peers, and that's a pretty interesting finding. And when we look at who they're currently sharing with, peers came up again, 85% kind of looked at sharing with our neighbors and others. I think that kind of speaks to the mix that we've been touching on today. We also heard about the importance of obviously trust in kind of that transaction of borrowing and lending, but we also heard about some other things like the importance of proximity, kind of focusing on the neighborhood sense of lending. And we heard about how, when people are passionate about what they're sharing, that can help kind of break down the barriers and help build trust.
So, Chris, are you finding that if people have a choice, they will share with people within a certain radius?
The study suggested that can be a big factor. And I think when we look at the way that neighborhood organizations and initiatives are set up, when we talk about experience with the tool library, it serves very well that neighborhood. And a lot of the people that are using it are very close. And especially connecting with your peers and neighbors, you want to build social connections. We saw that was a desire for people in our study.
And are traditional businesses, Chris, engaging in the share economy as well?
Well, I think, like April and Tom have talked about, I think businesses are looking at, what does this mean for them and their model and how can they be a part of it. But, we also see that in a lot of areas, Vancouver included, kind of the community organization initiatives are also there leading the way and have a big presence.
And how much do you see this, Chris Diplock, as a reaction to the economy?
I think that's definitely a factor. But I also think that it's out of need, but it's also, I think that there's just these new models that are allowing us to kind of function at this level that we couldn't before.
Tom Slee, where do you see the share economy in the coming years? What will it look like?
I think part of this comes down to what April was saying about it. She described it as different parts of the same pie. I think from where I sit, these are not even the same pie. They're not even the same meal. I think the kind of initiatives that Chris is involved in and has described, they sound like valuable things. And I wish him well, and I hope it goes well. I think the danger here is that what will happen with some of the larger enterprises is that they will use this almost as a smokescreen to push for deregulation of all kinds of things that are currently protected.
Actually, we have to leave it there. We're out of time, but we'll leave it with that warning. Thank you. April Rinne is the Chief Strategy Officer at Collaborative Labs. She was in San Francisco. Chris Diplock is the co-founder of Vancouver's Tool Library. Tom Slee is the author of No One Makes You Shop at Walmart, The Surprising Deceptions of Individual Choice. He's in Waterloo, Ontario. Do you participate in the share economy? If so, tell us how. If not, why not? Tweet us at The Current CBC. Post on Facebook at CBC Radio, The Current's Facebook page. Call us at 1-877-287-7366 or email us directly from the site cbc.ca/The Current and click on Contact. That is our program for today. Stay tuned to Radio 1 for Q with Shion Gomeshi. Be sure to watch CBC Television tonight for The National with Peter Mansbridge. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Thank you for listening to The Current.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.